in the year 165 before the Common Era, the Maccabees overpowered the Syrian Greek army, and when they entered into the Holy Temple that was ransacked, they could only find one cruse of oil that had the signature of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, and that was enough oil to last for only one day. And yet, that oil lasted for 8 complete days. And so we celebrate the festival of Hanukkah every year on this day, the 25th of Kislev, the day when they entered into the Holy Temple. And we too light the Hanukkah menorah for 8 days. And so to discuss this concept of why we celebrate 8 days, and the lessons of the candles, and why do we need a shamash to light the menorah? And to understand this on 5 levels of pshat, remez, drush, soid, and chassidus. First and foremost, on the level of pshat, on the simple level of the Torah, the question is, why do we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days? And the answer that is given in the Ran is that it took 4 days for the Maccabees to go to the place where they normally made the oil, and 4 days to come back. So that took a total of 8 days. According to the Meiri, that place was Tekoa, in the tribe of Asher, when they normally made the finest of the olive oil. So therefore it was a 8-day trip to go there and come back, and that's why it took 8 days. And the miracle was that the oil that was put into the menorah lasted for 8 days. According to the Beis Yosef, the reason why it was 8 days was because if you come in contact with a dead body, it takes 7 days to purify yourself. And being that all of the Maccabees were fighting a war, and they came in contact with dead bodies, they needed the 7 days of purity to have this ritual purification through the red heifer, and only on the 8th day could they produce new oil. So it took 8 days to get the new oil. And so we celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah for 8 days. And the miracle that took place, that the oil lasted all these 8 days until they were able to find and produce new pure oil. This is the level of pshat, the simple interpretation of why we celebrate 8 days. What is the remez? What is the hint? So the hint is that the number 8 alludes to the Messianic era. For we are told that when Mashiach will come, the kinnor, the harp that they will play in the Holy Temple, will have 8 strings. And so by lighting the 8-prong menorah, we have in mind the remez, the hint, for the future, that there will be a 3rd Holy Temple, where once again we are going to ignite the menorah. And the menorah itself is a symbol of the menorah that was used in the Holy Temple. So by lighting the menorah for 8 nights of Hanukkah, we are reminded of this service that took place every day in the Holy Temple, and we pray and we ask of God to return once again the 3rd Holy Temple. The concept of number 8, when I was teaching my children piano, you know, I always trust what my father tells me, that you want to give your children things you never did yourself. So because I never took piano lessons, I forced my kids to take piano lessons. And one day I called in someone to tune the piano. And as I'm standing there and they're tuning the piano, I said, you know, it's interesting how you tune the piano, so explain to me what's going on over here. Well, they say, so she tells me that the piano has an octave. I said, octave, isn't that from the number 8? She says, correct, octave is the number 8. I said, are there actually 8 notes? She says, no. You have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There are only 7 notes. So I asked her, why then do you call it an octave? And she responded, well, the 8th note is really a repeat of the first note, the A note. And that's why it's called an octave. So I was thinking about that for a moment, and I said, in truth, it is an octave. Because we find that the Torah tells us that when Mashiach will come, the kinnor, the harp, will have 8 strings. And furthermore, it says that when Mashiach will come, we're going to sing a shir chadash, a new song. And I wondered, what's the big deal about singing a new song? Every Tom, Dick, and Harry makes up a new song. Turn on the radio, every day there are new songs. So what's the miracle that Mashiach will create a new song? So I believe that Mashiach will not only create a new song, but rather he will create a new note. He will create the 8th note, the H note, the HaMashiach note. And not only will he teach us a new song, but rather a new way of how to sing. So this is the concept of number 8, alluding to the kinnor of Mashiach, a new way of how to sing. This is the remez, the hint of Chanukah. And then you have the drush, the homiletics. And that is, there's a basic question of why do we make a bracha on the Chanukah candles? We say, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvosa, that you have commanded us with your commandments. You have sanctified us with your commandments. When did God command us to light the Chanukah menorah? So the Gemara asks this question and gives 2 answers. One is that it's based on the verse in Deuteronomy 17:11. Over there in chapter 17 it says, Loisasur, that we shall not divert from the words of the sages. The Torah itself commands us to follow the words of the sages. And therefore, by doing the mitzvah of Chanukah candles, that was a mitzvah of the sages, as the Rambam tells us. These are one of the 7 mitzvahs that the sages established. We are fulfilling this verse in the Torah that God commanded, and therefore we can say the bracha, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvosav, that you have sanctified us with your commandments. The Gemara goes on to say another verse. In Deuteronomy 32 it says, Sha'al avicha ve'agetcha, ask your father and he will tell you. So therefore we have another verse. You ask your father, he'll tell you what to do by following what your father, representing the rabbis and your teachers, what they will tell you to do. You are fulfilling a commandment in the Torah. Why do we need 2 verses? Why isn't 1 verse enough? So the Ran explains that some rabbis feel it's a negative commandment and some rabbis feel it's a positive commandment. And that's the difference of choice, which verse we use. However, either way, it is based on a verse in the Torah. But after we make the bracha, what do? We take the shamash, the servant candle, and we begin to kindle the other candles. The first night 1 candle, the second night 2 candles, the third night 3 candles, and finally on the 8th night we kindle all 8 candles. So the question is, number 1, why do we need the shamash in the first place? Number 2, why do you put the shamash above all the other candles? If it's a servant candle, and the main purpose is simply to help us light the other candles, because there's a question in the Gemara whether or not you're allowed to light 1 candle from the other. It's a bezoyin, according to some opinions. It's an embarrassment or diminishes from the mitzvah to use a candle for another candle. And ultimately, Tosfos says, the fact is, this is the minhag today, it's the custom today that we use the shamash. But after we light the candles, we don't need the shamash anymore. So why do we still keep the shamash on the menorah and above all the other candles? How much above, it doesn't really matter, but a little bit above, to show a distinction between the Chanukah candles and the shamash. What is the reason of the shamash? The reason of the shamash is, as we say in the liturgy of Hanukkah, that ein lanu rishus lishtamesh behen ella l'reisan bilvad, that we have no permission to benefit from the light of the Hanukkah candles. And therefore we have the shamash to remind us that if accidentally I want to use the candles, here's the shamash to remind me to not use the candles for your own benefit. Now what's the message over here? What's the lesson over here? Even though the Rambam tells us when we teach somebody Torah and they are a beginner, we are to teach them the benefits of the mitzvos. And the Torah itself tells us, if you follow in my path, I will give you rain in its proper time. So in other words, you're allowed to do a mitzvah to get a reward. If you give tzedakah, God will pay you back many times over. If you put on tefillin, it will protect you, it will bless you with health, with long life. If you have a mezuzah on your door, it will protect you from robbers. These are different benefits that we have by doing mitzvahs. So you're allowed to tell a person, you know what? If you do a mitzvah, it's going to be good for you. However, ultimately, we don't do a mitzvah for that reason. Ultimately, we do a mitzvah because God commanded us to do the mitzvah. So here we find, when it comes to the Hanukkah candles, and we light the Hanukkah candles, mishatishka hachama, when it gets dark, implying that it's a dark generation, implying that a person in his life doesn't see God, and you're coming to him on the street and you give him a Hanukkah candle, a Hanukkah menorah, you're introducing to him the mitzvah for the very first time. Yet, even though normally you would first tell him the benefits, comes along Hanukkah and says, look, light the candle. Why? It's a mitzvah, and you can't benefit from the mitzvah. Even though the whole purpose of the menorah is to bring light into the home. Even though it's to bring light outside the home. And it's to bring new light into the whole world. So there is the spiritual light that is being promoted through the lighting of the menorah. Yet at the same time we say, hold on, put the shamash on top of the menorah, so that everybody can see from far and wide that this menorah is not supposed to be as a benefit for you, for your light. And this is a lesson that we don't only do the first night of Hanukkah or the second night of Hanukkah, but every day of Hanukkah. And we know that on a larger scale, the candles of Hanukkah represent, as King Solomon tells us, ki ner mitzvah v'toira that the candle represents the performance of a mitzvah, and the flame of the candle represents the study of Torah. And therefore, ultimately, the message of Hanukkah is that when we do a mitzvah and we study the Torah, we should do it. Why? Because God has commanded us, and not to try to derive benefit from that actual mitzvah. This is the drush, this is the homiletics of the menorah. What is the soid, the esoteric? So the soid is that we light 8 candles, not 7. And even though the Chanukah, or the menorah of Hanukkah, is symbolic of the menorah in the Holy Temple, yet the menorah in the Holy Temple only had 7 branches. Yet the Hanukkah menorah has 8 branches plus the shamash. So we're told that the number 7 represents nature. The number 8 represents a level that's beyond nature. As the Rashba calls it, Shemer HaHekif. Why do we need to have the 8th candle, a level beyond nature? So the answer is that, being that the menorah is unique, that we fulfill the mitzvah of Mahadrin min HaMahadrin. It's the only mitzvah that Jews throughout the entire world universally follow the opinion to be meticulous beyond meticulous. Normally we try to do the minimal of the mitzvah. Here, not only do we do the mitzvah in its full glory, but we go beyond the letter of the law, and we do mahadrin min mahadrin. Why? In other words, the Talmud tells us that the mitzvah of Chanukah, candles, is that ner ishu beisai, and that is, you light one candle each night of Chanukah. Each night of Chanukah, each household has one candle, and you light it for 8 nights. Come along the rabbis and said, why should you light one the first night and one the second night? And one the third night, let's increase. The second night 2 and the third night 3. And not only one person in the family should light it, but each individual in the family should light it. So it's mahadrin min mahadrin. It's meticulous beyond meticulous. This is such a beautiful thing that all Jews throughout the entire world do. They fulfill the mitzvah on the highest level, and we do it for 7 days. Such a beautiful mitzvah our rabbis wanted to preserve. And therefore, by creating the 8th night, the 8th encircles the 7 and preserves the 7 for the entire year. And that is the idea of lighting mahadrin min mahadrin all 8 nights. Another approach. In truth, we want to do mahadrin min mahadrin every single day of the week for 7 days, so that it imbues all the Sundays of the year and all the Mondays of the year and all the Tuesdays of the year, etc., etc. So therefore, we don't only do it one night of Hanukkah, but all nights of Hanukkah. However, in truth, if you analyze the mitzvah, you will see that the first night of Hanukkah is not mahadrin min mahadrin. It's not meticulous beyond meticulous, because you're only lighting one candle. When do you see that you're fulfilling this mitzvah of lighting mahadrin min mahadrin, that you are being meticulous beyond meticulous? Only when we light 2 candles the second night, instead of only lighting 1 candle. So really, throughout the 8 nights of Hanukkah, we are only fulfilling mahadrin min mahadrin 7 days. And therefore this inspires and this injects a new light and a new appreciation for the mitzvah, for all the mitzvahs of the Torah, throughout the entire year, all 7 days of the week. So this is the lesson of Soid, of the esoteric level of the Torah. What is the lesson of Chassidus? What does Chassidus tell us about Chanukah? So the answer is, Chanukah answers the question, why Chassidus? In other words, first of all, why do we have a holiday for 8 days? If the Hanukkah menorah is symbolic of the menorah in the temple, it should be only a 7-pronged menorah, not an 8-pronged menorah. And even though it took 8 days to get the oil, fine. So light a 7-pronged menorah for 8 days. Number 2, if it resembles the menorah in the Holy Temple, every day they lit 7 candles in the Holy Temple. They didn't increase Monday, Tuesday more than Sunday. They didn't light 1 candle Sunday, 2 candles Monday, 3 candles Tuesday. Every day of the week they lit all 7 candles. So light every night of Hanukkah all the candles. And thirdly, if it's symbolic of the menorah in the Holy Temple, they lit the Holy Temple's menorah in the afternoon. Yet the Talmud says we light the menorah after the sun sets. Mishetishka Chama. Why these changes? And this answers the question of Chassidus. And that is, if Chassidus is so important, and if Chassidus truly brings this new light into the world, why wasn't it revealed before the Arizal? Why is it that Arizal came and taught the Kabbalah, and then the Baal Shem Tov introduced it even more, and finally came along the Alter Rebbe? Through Chassidus Chabad, on the 19th of Kislev, we have Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. All of a sudden, it's a new holiday. If it's so important, why don't we study Chassidus even before the Alter Rebbe? And this question is really answered through Hanukkah. That we light the candles when it gets dark. Because it's dark, we have all these differences. Because it became dark and there is no light, therefore we have to increase in the light. And we see this from the very beginning of the Torah. God gave us the Torah when? The 6th day of the month of Sivan. That was the day that God said the 10 Commandments. And that's all He gave us, the 10 Commandments. Yes, He gave us some other laws like kosher and things like that. But basically we say all 620 commandments, the 613 of the Torah and the 7 commandments of the rabbis are found within the 620 letters of the 10 Commandments. But all we really heard was the 10 Commandments. And throughout the 40 years, Moses introduced new ideas, new commandments. For example, the mitzvah of the second Pesach. If you miss the first one, you could bring a second one. Or the mitzvah of Bnei Tzlafcha, the daughters of Tzlafcha, who said, we want a piece of land. Even though we have no brothers, our father died, we want to inherit the land of Israel. And God said to Moses, tell them that it shall be. They will get a piece in the land of Israel. So we see that not all the mitzvos were given in one shot. The mitzvos were given when they were needed. And when they were not needed, they were not given. And we have a Gemara in the Nedarim, a very powerful Gemara. The Gemara says over there, Ilimali chatu, if the Jews would not have sinned with the golden calf, they would have only received the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. That's it. Because they sinned and they brought the world down into darkness, so now we have the 24 books of the prophets, and we have the whole Talmud, the 60 books of the Mishnah, and we have Kabbalah, and we have Chassidus. All of these things are to repair the damage. And as the generations get further and further from Sinai, and as the generations get darker and darker, so now we have to increase more and more. And that is why Hanukkah is the answer of Chassidus, is the answer of why. Why now? Why now? Because it became darker. Why now? Because the sun has set. Why now? Mishatishka Achama. There is no holy temple. So therefore, it's not enough to light a 7-pronged menorah, which represents the 7 days of the week, which is nature. It's not enough we light it when it's already light. We need to increase to light an 8-pronged menorah. We need to elicit and inject into the world a light that is beyond time and space, to transform darkness into light. And we need to increase every day, because if Mashiach has not yet come, if there is still darkness in the world, it's a proof we have not yet done enough. So every day we're doing more and more and more. And we don't light the menorah inside the temple or inside the house, but the mitzvah primarily is to light it outside, to light up the streets, to light up the darkness of Golus, to light up the darkness of exile. And the same is true with Chassidus. When was Chassidus introduced? Mishatishka Hachama, when the sun set, when the Jews were in exile, when they were living far from Israel, when the prince of the king became sick and there was nothing else to save the prince, the king said, take the crown jewel, liquidize it and give it to my son to drink. So what does Chassidus say about Chanukah? Chanukah is the answer to why we need Chassidus. And through the fact that we will increase, and through the fact that we will add, and through the fact that we do more today than we did yesterday, we are living Hanukkah every day of the week. And that will bring about, of course, the rebuilding of the third Holy Temple. And so I want to conclude with a story. It's a story that I've said before. It's a beautiful story. A story of Yehuda Avner, who was the speechwriter for many prime ministers in Israel. And once Yehuda Avner is sitting by the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe in his office late in the wee hours of the morning. And the Rebbe says to him, Rabbi Yehuda, let me explain to you what I try to accomplish. If I tell you, go to the cupboard and open it up, what do you see? And you tell me you see a candle, I will tell you, Yehuda, that is not a candle. That is a lump of wax with a string in the middle. That's what it is. And the Rebbe melodically said, when does it become a candle? When it fulfills its purpose on which it came down to the world and was created. In other words, when you ignite the wick, when you put a flame to the candle, then it becomes a candle. When it's not kindled, it's simply clay or wax and a string. And so the Rebbe said, that's what I tried to accomplish. The body is like the wax. The soul is like the wick. And I tried to ignite the soul of every Jew so that they fulfill their mission down here in this world. So on the way out, Rabbi Yehuda turns to the Rebbe and he says, Nu Rebbe, have you ignited my soul? Have you fulfilled your mission? And the Rebbe said to him, Rabbi Yehuda, only you can ignite your soul. However, I have given you a match. And so Hanukkah is the epitome of the mitzvah. Hanukkah is the icon for all mitzvahs. And that is to light up our soul and to light up the world, and never to be complacent of all the mitzvahs that we have done up until now, but to continue to add more and more, and to bring so much light into the world that we burn down the walls of exile and we see the third holy temple, when once again the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, will light the menorah before our very eyes.